The root cause of burnout, in my opinion, stems from this idea of specialization in our society. And this idea runs really deep, and I've seen many videos pop up over the internet on how to deal with burnout, but none of them really satisfied me. So today I'm going to make my version of how to combat burnout and to talk about this idea of impersonal interests proposed by Bertrand Russell in his book, The Conquest of Happiness. So this, in a sense, is a little treatise on the subject of happiness by Bertrand Russell, which I finished recently, and there's just so much in here that I can probably create a whole lecture series out of this book. So one of the chapters in here dealt with impersonal interests. And after I've read this chapter, I thought to myself, this is basically the root solution to burnout. This is basically going to address so many things. So in this video, I'm really excited to share that insight with you guys on impersonal interests and to basically shine some light on this idea of why you shouldn't be one thing in your life, why you should invest in multiple disciplines in your life, invest time into things that you're organically interested in outside of your direct path in life, because we can get so narrow focused and obsessed with one thing in our lives that we basically don't spare any time for anything outside of it. So to define impersonal interests as the solution to burnout, as the solution for this modern day phenomenon of exhaustion, are basically interests that you're organically interested in that are unrelated to your main path in life, that are unrelated to anything that you would deem as important, or anything that's like professional obligations or familial obligations or work obligations, so to speak. But before we dive into that really deep dive into the subject of burnout, into the subject of investing in more time in personal interests, I have to tell you guys a little bit about this app that I found recently that introduced a lot of impersonal interests into my life. So my own work on YouTube and my own work at university, they're highly theoretical and conceptual work, and I don't necessarily have much time after that entire conceptual exercise to ground myself down into habits like exercising or eating on time, or like reminding myself that I should read some books outside of my university course reading to really, to get the pleasure of reading back. So if I keep going down that track, I run a risk of really burning out. I run a risk of not putting in enough time into these other building blocks of my life. And that is where Fabulous comes in. Fabulous is basically coined as the #1 self-care app on the platform. And this is basically a part habit tracker, part behavior change app that's going to establish sustainable routines in your life. So for my own work, a lot of my time goes into writing university papers, goes into scripting these YouTube videos, goes into making these YouTube videos. So there are all of these, before I've discovered Fabulous, I've realized that there are all of these missing pieces in my life, or these essential building blocks that are in a sense missing. That's not really rejuvenating me to allow me to be creative again. That allows me to get back into research again, get back into reading literature for university again. So this app, in a sense, introduced into my life a very healthy morning routine, a very sustainable morning routine, which right now I'm following. It's a 4-step program that I've customized for myself through this behavior change program. And of course, this also serves as a habit tracker for you to track how close you are to your goals. So one of 2 ways that you can use this app, behavior change program and habit tracker. And this app, in a sense, introduced a lot of elements that I've neglected in my personal life into my life again. For example, eating breakfast on time. For example, reading 30 pages in French, which is something that I derive a lot of pleasure out of. For example, meditating for 10 minutes. For example, doing a little exercise before I head to university every morning. So this is an excellent app if you really want to create sustainable habits, if you really want to invest in yourself, if you really want to invest in aspects of your life that you kind of neglected, if your work is also very theoretical, if you're also up in the clouds. So as a lucky viewer of this channel, Fabulous right now is offering the first 100 people who click the link in the description down below a 25% off on your premium membership. So there are hundreds of habits, over 100 habits for you to choose from in your habit tracker. And there are all these programs that you can enroll yourself into to basically create your personal, customized routines in your life, to create the best routine in your life. And if you want to create that for yourself, be sure to follow the link in the description down below. So right now, let's talk about this idea of impersonal interests and how to introduce more of these interests into your life. So count on your hand right now outside of work or outside of studying or outside of these things that you deem as important, how many interests do you do for yourself? How many books have you read that you can safely say, I've read this just for me? I've read that book just for my own pleasure. I've watched that film just because I enjoy it, not because some algorithm recommended it to me, not because my friends suggest me to watch it, not because I'm doing this not for an ulterior purpose. I'm just doing it for myself. So for a lot of us, probably not that many. For a lot of us, it's probably such a rare thing that we do anything for ourselves anymore. And this idea is really a product of this modern idea of specialization. Now, I've noticed that a lot of people are very obsessed with labels nowadays in our society. A lot of us are very obsessed with a title. So for example, you'll go to a party and people ask you, so what do you do? So then immediately you have to supply the person with a label. I'm a teacher, or I'm a writer, I'm a creative, or should I say I'm this and this and that. So what this labeling is essentially neglecting is how complicated we are as human beings, how intrinsically full of contradictions we are. In a sense, specialization, through forcing people into these roles, it's not just only going to change how we work, it also changes our subjectivity. It also changes how we view ourselves as human beings. So you're no longer just a person who teaches. You're no longer a verb, but you're a noun. You're a teacher. And that self-definition feeds into how you regard the rest of your life. So if you're overtly obsessed with being a certain thing, if you're overtly obsessed with being on the right path in your life, if you're overtly obsessed with, for example, being a student, this is a very common problem for students, and this is why students are, should I say, the group that's most prone to burnout, is that once you've defined yourself as a university student, as a student who's very hardworking, you tend to feed all your energy into maintaining that identity. And of course, for younger people, we've spent so much time trying to construct a sense of who we are and trying to identify who we are at such a young age, we don't necessarily see the damage this is causing us. So immediately, once you've constructed an identity out of this pursuit that you have, once you've constructed a label around this one thing that you're doing in your life, once you've cornered yourself into this one pursuit, then that closes off a lot of opportunities for you to pursue your organic interests outside of this one thing that you're focusing on, outside of this hyper specialization, outside of this like very unidimensional personality of yours. So that cuts off a lot of these potential interests, ideas, or things that you're potentially interested in. That cuts you off from all these things that you could very much derive a lot of pleasure out of, that you could very much derive a lot of joy out of, that could potentially rejuvenate you to return you in a better form back to the main thing that you're pursuing. So this happens a lot with a lot of students. You know, once you've adopted the idea that you're going to be a hardworking student, once you've adopted the idea that you're going to be like the top of your class, once you've become super competitive about being the best in your field or being the best in your subject, then all of your energy sort of goes into that one thing. And then you sort of neglect these interests, you know, these satellite interests. I like to call them satellite interests. These interests that could otherwise really rejuvenate you to return you to your studies in a better shape, to re-energize you to tackle your studies again. And that is why most people who are hyper-specialized, who are brought into one thing in their lives, they tend to be the people who are prone to burnout the most. So in a sense, impersonal interests are difficult to adopt, not because they're not interesting to you, not because you haven't explored these subjects enough, is because the reason why it's so difficult to adopt these impersonal interests is because you simply have this identity. And anything that conflicts with that identity of yours, anything that conflicts with your main interests, you tend to disregard. You tend to rationalize to yourself that, oh, that's not important. You know, going to that painting class on Saturday, that's a waste of time. I should be applying myself to my subject. I should be studying politics, or I should be reading that book for my class. I should be reading that treatise for my class. So you tend to disregard all of these things that could otherwise rejuvenate you to return you back on track, to sort of like regenerate that sort of energy that you need for this main thing that you're doing. So, and that whole cycle leads to burnout. That whole nervous cycle leads to a terrible downfall where you'll grow to hate this main pursuit of yours. Because as human beings, if you do one thing for too long, you tend to get bored of it. That's simply a matter of fact. If you do one thing for too long, you're going to get bored of it. So if you don't have these supporting interests in your life, if you don't have these interests that sort of like organically interest you, that's going to reintroduce clarity into your main pursuit. That's going to lead to a lot of, downfall. That's going to lead to a lot of internal conflict. And one day, if you look at your subject, you grow to hate it. That's how you know you are venturing towards the point of burnout. You're growing to resent your subject. That's how you know you're really becoming a unidimensional person. So the root cause of burnout, in my opinion, is this idea of becoming overtly obsessed with your identity, becoming really obsessed with this one thing that you're doing in your life. And the solution is rather simple, is to open yourself up to alternative interests that organically interest you, yet you've never allowed yourself the time to explore, and to somehow reframe it in your brain as something that's important. Because we don't do these things not because we don't think they're interesting. We don't do these things because we think they're unimportant. But actually, I'm telling you that you actually need to be investing more time into these satellite interests, into these interests that are going to bring more clarity into your lives. Expand your interests. This is actually going to allow more energy for you to refocus your energy onto your main pursuit in life. And that's what I think is really, the root solution to gaining more energy, refreshing you once in a while, adopting a healthier attitude towards facing burnout. Because if you push yourself too far, you can very, very well slip into escapism. You can very well slip into things that you rather not slip into, like drugs, alcohol, and all of these, escapist behaviors. Now, if you adopt this alternative view that, these things that you want to explore, they're actually important for your life. It's actually important for you to have many interests in your life. It's actually important for you to embrace this contradiction because this is what's going to happen if you adopt more interest in your life that allows more space for contradictions. Because you wouldn't expect an academically minded person to go pursue something like a live sketching class over the weekend. You don't necessarily expect a politics major to go take up sewing over the weekend, right? So there are all of these contradictions that are kind of like holding you back from organically exploring what really interests you. And I would argue, and in Bertrand Russell's treatise, The Conquest of Happiness, impersonal interests can actually save you from this entire shebang of burnout. And that's really the key insight of today's video. So, in summary, embrace impersonal interests and embrace things that you otherwise wouldn't pursue because you think they're unimportant. And in this video, at the end of today's video, I really want you to rewire your thinking on the subject, and to consider these interests as important, and do these interests in little segments. Sprinkle these interests into your life in whatever shape or form possible to rejuvenate you, to put you back on track with the thing that you actually consider as important. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video essay on the topic of impersonal interests, and leave me your thoughts down below. Are you the kind of person that tends to get stuck in their heads a lot? Are you the kind of person who's also, poo-pooing these interests that are very well lifesavers? Are you the kind of person that's afraid of contradictions in your identity? And leave me your thoughts down below. And RC Waldun here, and I will see you in the next video.